Welcome, everybody. We are just going to wait a minute or two here while everybody gets in and gets access, and then we will start. If you want to put in the chat where you are listening in from, that would be fun to see where everybody is today. I am joining you from Rochester, New York, and Kaitlyn, our presenter, is joining you from Philadelphia. Got some folks from all over. This is great. I love that our reach is larger than New York State for sure. All right, I'm going to start in 1 second. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping notes and community guidelines to mention. If you have any sound or technical issues today, please let us know in the chat box with a direct message. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to all registrants within the next week or so. We will be doing a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation, so feel free to send your questions through the chat box at any time, and we will go through them all at the end. We ask that you hold each other with mutual respect, come to this space teachable, and stay engaged with our presenter throughout the program. And now I'd like to share a bit about the Documentary Heritage Preservation Services for New York. DHPSNY, as we like to call it, is a program of the New York State Archives and the New York State Library that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services are provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts and include archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, and access to a variety of educational programs such as this webinar. To learn more about our services, please visit dhpsny.org. That's DHPSNY.org. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to our presenter, Kaitlyn, to get us started.
Hi, sorry. Sorry about that. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kaitlyn Pettengill. I'm the Digital Archive Specialist at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. For description purposes, I'm a woman with dark blonde hair. I'm wearing a white dress. The background is a plain gray wall. My position at CCAHA as the Digital Archive Specialist, I work with libraries, archives, museums, other cultural heritage organizations to help them design and carry out digitization projects that are sustainable, cost-effective, and they're aligned with their mission. So the purpose of today's webinar is to walk you through the project management side of digitizing archival material. That means everything from defining the project scope and goals to thinking ahead about how you're going to provide access to the public and to digital preservation. The image capture part of digitization is actually the easiest part if you've laid all of the correct groundwork for yourselves. So we'll start with how to define that project scope and goals. We'll move on to setting priorities for digitization. So that's what you'll be digitizing first. Next is advocating for the resources that you're going to need. Digitization can require a lot of funding, equipment, staff time, maintenance costs, as well as advertising to get the word out to the public about a new collection. And then I'll talk about some common conservation issues that will impact digitization So I work at the Conservation Center. It's a really crucial part of our mission. You don't want to do any damage to the originals when you are digitizing. And also some condition issues can make it nearly impossible to get a good scan. So you have to consider it from both ends. We're then going to discuss file formats and standards for the images. This is a vast topic that I can't cover in a quick talk, but I'm going to go over the major choices that you'll need to make as part of the project planning and why those decisions are essential. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about creating a sustainable access plan. I firmly believe that the #1 reason to be digitizing your material is to increase accessibility, but that also means building digital preservation into the whole process from day one, at least thinking about the issues that you're going to have to be keeping in mind. So I'll be asking some questions throughout for you to discuss in the chat if you feel like it. I've always found that one of the most helpful resources for me is other collection staff who've encountered similar challenges. So have a chat between yourselves. And my first discussion prompt is, if you had unlimited resources, what would be the very first thing in your collection that you would want to digitize and why? All right, so large-scale projects require a clear scope and goals to be successful. Scope is defining what your project is going to be and what it is not going to be, which is maybe sometimes more important. It helps to define your audience, the purpose, the kind of materials that you can digitize, the type of files that you're going to make. And without a clear scope, digitization projects can really, really balloon. They can run over budget. They can stall out entirely. So you want to start by asking, what is going to be in scope for this project? Am I just going to do photographs? Am I going to include manuscripts, maps, audiovisual materials? Are they going to be things that I can do in-house, or am I going to have to find a vendor? Are there going to be really fragile materials? And am I doing this for internal users, or is this for researchers or K through 12 students? So it's good to kind of consider those things as you're putting together the project plan. So the SMART goals framework, which some of you might be familiar with, is an easy way to organize those project goals. It's very common in project management. Many of you are probably familiar with them already. It was first proposed, I think, in 1981 by somebody who specialized in project management, which is not my background, obviously, but it is very applicable here. So specific is the first one, which is what will be digitized, why, and for whom. So you could say maybe what will be digitized is going to be 19th century land deeds. And who is responsible is going to be the digitization team that you're putting together from your staff. And it's going to happen on site. And it's being done because you're participating in a collaborative project with other local organizations, and you want to have a really fantastic digital display when you're done. So it's going to be like a collaborative website that people will be able to search, in which case you have to consider like the GIS. Measurable. What are the deliverables or the output that you're going to be doing? This is the quantifiable indicators. It's things like the number of images that will be scanned, the number of files that you'll have in the end, because you might be compressing images and putting them together into a PDF to make it more accessible. So then you've got multiple images that form the one file in the end. The number of metadata records that you're going to be creating. So setting a measurable goal would be something like complete the digitization of 250 negatives per month and record the metadata for 100% of those items within a week of digitizing them. I mean, maybe you won't achieve it, but it's good to set a goal that you can try and measure against, and then you can see whether or not it's workable or if you have to adjust. So achievable again, is it realistic with your staff and resources? You have to consider your in-house expertise, the equipment that you already have and what you might have to buy, your budget. You want to really avoid over-promising, including to yourselves, because if you can only scan 150 things a day, you can't plan on getting 500 done. You have to keep things within what's actually achievable in the amount of time that you can allot to the project per day. Relevant, which is how is it supporting your institution's mission? Is it supporting increasing access? Is it supporting preservation? Is it outreach? How is it aligning with your funding requirements? And how are you going to be providing the access to the community? You want to avoid digitizing materials just because they're available. And then finally, time bound, which is, do you have a specific deadline that you have to meet? Maybe there's a major milestone coming up. Maybe it's the centenary of your organization and you really want to celebrate your history. Maybe it's a final deadline before an exhibition launches or your grant period is ending. So there's just, again, write your scope and your goals into the project plan that you're putting together. It becomes a really good reference point for your decision making. It can be really helpful too to then go to the higher ups or board members and advocate for resources. So to give you another chat prompt, maybe you want to think back to that collection that you picked originally and define why you're digitizing it and who is it going to most benefit to have it digitized. Now, this is a nice little graphic that I got from UNESCO. It's their key steps in executing a digitization project. We're not going to cover every step in depth today, but they all are elements that are part of every digitization plan that you're putting together. The overall project workflow is usually following along, but if it's a pilot project for your organization, then there's going to be additional steps mixed in. So you start with planning the new project, then selecting your objects, putting together your workspace if you don't have it already, or adjusting it so it works best for this project, developing your workflows, actually doing the imaging work, putting the metadata in, backing up your files, providing access, preserving the files long-term, and then documenting the lessons that you learned, which is a really important step that people forget about sometimes. You will always learn something new from every project you do. You will always find, smarter ways of doing something. You will always find unexpected bottlenecks. And if you record what you've learned, then you can adapt from it. All right, so first consider what's already been digitized. You really want to look at what is already available to you. Who is using it and how? How were they digitized? Are you happy with the job that was done? You can use that as a model, or you can use it as a cautionary tale to say this is really not how we want to be going about doing this project. So where are you beginning and why? Not everything can be digitized at once. Not everything should be. I like to use the RAVE acronym, which I have adapted from the Strong Museum of Play. They use rare or one-of-a-kind original documents for the R. A is at-risk media or fragile documents. V is valuable for historical or research purposes. And E is for them entertaining, which, it attracts kids. It's the Strong Museum of Play. It should be entertaining. It is good for social media engagement, but I like to use E for exposed because it works better for the sites that I've worked with in the past, which is that it's frequently being handled or it's frequently going out on exhibition. So again, just a little bit more about those. You want to make sure that things are rare or they are unique to you. Maybe it's something that it was published, but it had a very short or a very small run, and yours is annotated, or somebody drew in the margins, and so it's more interesting to you for that reason. You want to make sure that it's not already available online. You don't want to use your limited resources to make a collection publicly available that's already been put onto Internet Archive or HathiTrust or the Digital Public Library of America, which are three big sites that you should consider looking at if you want to make sure that nobody else has already provided public access to a similar or the same item. A for at-risk media. It could be things like nitrate negatives, brittle newspapers, floppy disks. There's a caveat here, which is that if an item is so fragile that actually digitizing it is risking damaging it further, then you want to have a conservator have a look at it, stabilize it if they can. I don't recommend digitizing if you're going to be doing damage unless it is that rare case where the item is in such poor condition and it's rapidly deteriorating. So if you don't digitize it, it means losing access to that information entirely. In that case, I would say that it's better to have the digital copy than to be left with nothing. So V for historical or research purposes, valuable for historical research purposes. These are things that have a high value to researchers, even if they haven't been requested frequently in the past. If you make that particular digital item available, then it might generate more interest. or it's valuable to the community that created the records originally, or to audiences that you haven't been working with yet, but you're really hoping to reach out and you think that this is engaging for them and important to them. And again, E for exposed. These are things that are frequently being requested by researchers in a reading room. Maybe they go out on loan a lot. Maybe your education team is working with them a lot. And digitizing means that you can make a digital copy available instead. Maybe you can create a high quality printed facsimile, so it doesn't need to be handled in the reading room. If you have a really high resolution digital copy, you can compare that to the original over time, which can help you to notice more subtle damage that wasn't immediately apparent to the eye. I've been working with a historic cemetery that wants to digitize its original plot maps. They were still being used by the groundskeepers, and they would have to take out these 19th century maps at times onto the grounds with them, which obviously was not working well for the collection. So digital copies mean that groundskeepers can do the work that they need to do. The archival material stays in a secure spot, and both the physical cemetery and the archives are staying in the best shape that they can be. Additional reasons for choosing a particular collection could be that you're participating in a major project between yourselves and sister organizations. Maybe you want to adapt a pilot to create new workflows and really demonstrate the value to organizations' leadership. So if you're doing that pilot project, a few things that you might want to consider in addition to RAVE are that the material is probably best if it's easier to digitize. So it can already be scanned with equipment that you can easily borrow or purchase, or that you already have. Things like flat items that fit on a standard flatbed, like photographs that are in good condition. And then also material that you already have intellectual control over. So it's already organized, you already have a decent inventory, you're not expecting any surprises when you go into folders and you're pulling out the photos. You have information like the artist, the photographer, or the subject that you could use to create the metadata, so you're not starting from scratch there. You want to consider what's already been inventoried, what's already been processed. If it's archival material, it can be really difficult to create a plan for unprocessed collections. And you want to consider if there's any copyright issues. Do any of the materials contain personal identifying information, medical information? Doctors' personal papers sometimes might accidentally include information on their patients. If it was created before we started having laws that governed the use of medical information, they might have put something in by accident. You have to find that and make sure you're not putting it online. School records are also regulated by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. So if you're trying to digitize school records from a historic school, if the student was under 18 at the time of the record's creation, then FERPA applies until they pass away. So that can be quite a long time. That could be conceivably somebody who was born in the 20s. Like you have to keep in mind, you might think that this is old enough that it's not an issue, but just to comply, you should have a thought about that. You might need to conduct a collection survey before you actually get started. If you haven't already got a good sense of the collection, you want to maybe go through, do a sampling, say 15% of the folders. You want to record the formats that you find. Are you coming across a lot of staples that you might have to deal with? What are the sizes? Get kind of an average in mind. If there's particular condition issues. So if you have that 15%, you can at least have something to start with. And you can start noting conservation challenges, like items that need to be cleaned or stabilized before you start scanning. And these survey results can be a really good tool when you're advocating for resources, because it's hard data. So you can show that some of those materials are at risk, and having that evidence is probably more persuasive to a board or higher ups than saying, we should just start doing work. You can connect it back to this collection and why it's important to get it done. Now, talking again about unprocessed collections, people will ask me sometimes if it's possible to digitize alongside doing the collection survey. So like say maybe a donor's about to give you a large collection of photographs and they're very eager for it to be made available online, but it's not in any kind of order. You don't have any intellectual control over it. So maybe the donor says, well, what if you inventory and digitize at the same time? Then you can meet the deadline that I want for when it's going to be made available publicly. And that way you don't have to pull everything out at the same time. You could just do it at the same time. You can just you don't have to go back and digitize after the fact. So my answer to that is that it's not impossible, but it's almost always inadvisable. I really don't suggest that as a way of going about doing things because it's not actually more efficient. There are so many elements to keep track of at once, and it's definitely not a good way to do a pilot project if your organization is new to doing large-scale mass scanning. So advocating for resources. I'd say that the biggest pitch for resources is accessibility and discoverability, which are connected but a little different. So discoverability is how people are going to discover your collections. How is the public going to find out about them? Users are not going to request what they don't know that you have. And there was a 2013 study that I found to be actually a really good tool for advocating, which is that the 2013 study found that historic Canadian newspapers that have been digitized and could be found, by searching for specific terms, they ended up being cited 10 times more often in academic dissertations than newspapers that weren't digitized and weren't easily searchable. So that's PhD history researchers. That's people who are comfortable going into archives and doing hands-on work, and it was still 10 times more often it was cited if they found it online. And I'm sure that the difference has increased astronomically during COVID, so that if things are digitized or at least are findable online, then you're going to have more users. And obviously making them available online makes everything more accessible to the whole world, rather than just whoever is able to come in physically to your archive or your museum. So before I move on to strategies for advocacy, I just have another little prompt, which is, how do you currently communicate the value of digitization to higher ups or decision makers at your organization? I've got align with strategic goals here, use impact narratives, present data, speak their language, and start small and scale up. So you want to tie your project to major institutional missions like education or community access, whatever's listed in your organizational vision statement or mission statement. Digitization can improve access for rural communities and students and researchers who can't visit you in person, which often aligns with a lot of grant funders' goals too. So having that written out can help you to actually get funding. Use impact narratives, which is kind of telling little stories about how your collections could be used by your user base. People are not going to request what they don't have, so you can tell a story about the users that will be interested and how they're going to use that material. So you could say something like, we've got these oral history recordings and we really want to digitize them, make them available to the public, because longtime locals might recognize the name of stores or slang that the general public doesn't remember, and so getting those locals to tell us what this means, we need to get in and do that quickly. So that's a good little impact narrative that you could use. So you want to present data. This is where you can use statistics from your reading room, researcher emails asking for help with specific collections, your website traffic, how often things are being downloaded. It's all useful statistics that you can use to support digitization and when you're arguing with leadership about having more resources. And the collection survey can also be a really helpful tool here. Visuals are good. You might want to show a board member the physical item next to the digitized counterpart, so you can demonstrate the level of detail, how you can really zoom in and you can get all of the detail in like a beautiful print, and how it can be preserved indefinitely. It can be maybe more persuasive than just having a spreadsheet for some people. So giving them a range of ways to make your argument. Or to speak their language. This is sometimes corporate speak, depending on where you work. You might want to use terms like return on investment or risk mitigation. You really want to highlight how the project is going to support the institution's mission or strategic partnerships, and maybe use some language that's that is accessible and familiar to higher ups, depending on who they are. And start small and scale up. You want to use a pilot project that can help you to demonstrate value and to work out bottlenecks. You don't want to dive right into a huge collection with a lot of potential issues. That pilot you can then present to your higher ups of your board. You can say, look, this was successful, so we then went to have more resources, and we want to expand this. We want to keep doing this work and on a larger scale. So, budgeting. A realistic budget is going to be the backbone of any successful digitization project, and it has to account for the staff that's going to do the work, the equipment and software, storage, training, if you're going to have maybe train volunteers to do some of the work for you, or interns, and there's always hidden costs. So you have to consider with staffing that you might need to have somebody hired to do the digitization work, or you have to take time away from other employees' schedules to do the work. People are also going to have to create the metadata. They're going to have to upload. They're going to have to do quality control. So they're all things that are going to take a bite out of staff time. You have to consider the storage for while you're working, the actual physical on-site. Where are we going to be keeping boxes as we're in the middle of doing the work? How much space do we have to set up this digitization station? And then you also have to consider the long-term storage of the files. So it's two types of storage that can both require some money depending on how much space you have available to you. And then also with the hidden costs, I would say that a lot of times people get grant funding to do these fantastic digitization projects, but they don't include they don't have the money to long-term sustain it and make it available long-term. So you can put together something really amazing, and then 2 years later, it's what we might call a zombie project, because it's just not really accessible anymore. Maybe it's based off of Google Maps data, and Google Maps has changed its algorithms, and so it's not functioning quite properly, and you just don't have the money to update it and to maintain it. You always have to keep that in mind too. But there's always hidden costs with these big digital projects. It can really help when you're advocating for resources to connect each of these costs back to a benefit that you could get by having it. So I would say that you really want to don't just dump figures out there, but say, well, if we have the additional staff, we can do these additional things. We can achieve these other goals. And I highly recommend using the Digital Library Federation's digitization calculator. You can just Google it, but it can really help you to calculate the cost of a project. It's just estimates, but if you want to start somewhere, they've compiled all that data by doing surveys of organizations that have done digitization projects, and it can help you to calculate the cost of a project by the collection size, the number of files you're creating, the staff that you have available, all the different factors that you can adapt and get better calculations from them. So if fragile materials can't survive the scanner, then digitizing risks causing more harm than good. You want to make sure that it's always a benefit to the collection, it's not doing it harm. You want to consider where the material is stored. Is it off-site? Is it on-site and easy to access? Does it require special handling? Does it need book cradles or weights? Are you going to have to remove fasteners? Are you going to have to take things out of encapsulation? Are you going to have to get treatment done before it's safe to handle? Is anything actively deteriorating? So anything that's in poor condition but it's really stable, it should probably be saved for later and be a lower priority, whereas things that are actively deteriorating should be a higher priority, both for conservation and for digitalization. You want to partner with conservation professionals if you can. You want to build time into the project schedule for anything that needs to be reviewed and triaged. I wouldn't delay doing digitization to do a full conservation treatment unless it's critical, and you can use the collection survey form to flag things that are going to need special care if they jump out to you. problematic materials for both the materials themselves and for trying to get a decent image could be fragile scrapbooks, newsprint, bound volumes. You can get really tight margins, things that are printed on onion skin, which has a lot of show through. I've worked at a place that had a lot of Quaker marriage certificates, which are extremely large, and they can be really difficult to get a good image without having special equipment. For flat paper and photographs, you want to make sure that the original fits completely on the surface of the scanner. The lid of the scanner can crush and crease the original if the paper doesn't fit onto it. To get the clearest image possible, you want to make sure that the scanner's clean. You want to use a soft cloth to clean the glass top of it, to remove debris and dirt. You want to check it regularly as you're working to make sure that there hasn't been any dust accumulating, or if you're working with something that has charcoal or red rot or something like that might smudge and transfer on to later items. You could be actually spreading a mess if you're not careful. And you never, ever, ever want to use an automatic feeder. Just word on that now. I know somebody who had a volunteer who put some things that were on onion skin through an automatic feeder, and it was quite a disaster. So never, ever, ever use an automatic feeder with archival collections, unless it was just published yesterday, I suppose. But I don't know why it would be considered archival at that point. So I mentioned the show through and bleed through. You can use a white piece of paper to back the original, which will help you get a better image. If you've got the onion skin, you can back it again. So basically, like bleed through, like the ink is old and it's like iron gall ink, and it's breaking through the paper. And if for letterpress, you can end up backing each leaf with a piece of paper so you get the best images you go through. All right, so moving on to choosing file formats and standards, the images that you create need to match your goals for their use. You need to make sure that the files that you're creating are going to work for your users. They can be integrated into the software platform that you're using. I'm not going to be covering this in too much depth today, but if you're going to be purchasing new equipment, then you really need to double check that it can actually create the images that you need. I know more than one organization that bought an overhead scanner, like a Caesar, which are a little bit more affordable, but they're meant more for office documents. And they can't do high resolution images that are needed for older manuscript items or for photographs. So just, make sure that whatever it is that you purchase is going to work for the kind of material that you need to be taking care of. You want to choose sustainable formats. That is a TIFF for your master, your preservation files. It's almost always the way to go for visual material. It's widely adopted. It's uncompressed. You can accommodate, high resolution, great color, bit depth. And then for the derivatives or the access files, it's good to go with a PDF if you're talking about a volume, because that can be easily downloaded and easily shared with researchers, not as one file rather than multiple. And JPEG is opened in a variety of different programs. It's good for sharing digitally, so email, websites, but JPEG is not acceptable for your preservation copy because it is what we call a lossy format. So it's only good for your access copies. Now, file formats, resolution, bit depth, color space, and color are all things that you're going to have to keep in mind. There are a lot of standards and recommendations that are laid out by different organizations like the American Library Association or the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative, which is FADGI, which is quite a name, FADGI. FADGI can be really overwhelming. It's just a guide. It was designed for how federal agencies need to be digitizing things and then providing those images to the National Archives. But it is a good thing to kind of be familiar with, so that you can consider the different levels that you could be hitting. It goes from 1 to 4 stars. So 1 is considered to be acceptable but not good, and 4 is considered to be, the best. But at the same time, it's not really attainable for most organizations. It's not even a good goal a lot of the time. There's a point at which you're creating really big files with a lot of really high resolution, and it's just not necessary. You're just creating a bigger file than you need. It's taking up a lot of storage, and you're not creating images that are going to be useful to you or your users. So you want to keep in mind that sometimes 3-star or 2-star even is ideal for your project. This is all covered in far more depth in a free webinar series that a past colleague of mine did. It's called Digitization 101. You can find it for free on the Conservation Center's YouTube channel. And she went into a lot of depth about each of these specifications. And it could be very helpful if it's something that you want to be learning more about. I'm just covering it a little bit to talk about the things that you have to keep in mind when you're planning out your project. So there is the resolution. That's pixels per inch. Sometimes you'll see it written as dots per inch, but that's kind of a holdover from matrix printers. And you can keep increasing it quite a lot. Professional scanners can go up to an absolutely huge resolution, but you don't always need that. The only time I would say that you want to have a very, very high resolution is when you're talking about like a 35 millimeter slide or a negative or a tin type, something small and with a lot of visual information that could really benefit from you being able to get, to really blow it up and have a good look. If you're talking about a document, you can probably do it around 300 and it'll be fine. Do you want to have color or black and white? They used to recommend that you could use grayscale if the actual printed object, if it's just black text on paper. But personally, I think that color is really important in replicating the physicality of the object. When you look at it, you want to, feel like it properly represents not just the information on the page, but the page itself. So I always advocate for having some color in there if you can, because paper is not actually white. And I like things to be in color, even if the readable information itself is just black text. But it does make a big difference to the file size and the storage that you're going to need. So it depends, again, on how you want to use the images. Here's the bit depth. So you can see on the left, it's 1 bit, which is just 2 tones available per pixel. So it can either be white or it can be black. And that means that it's grainy, really. And then on the right, you've got 8 bits. So you have a huge range of tones available to you. And it looks a lot smoother and more natural. So you generally want to have a higher bit depth when you're talking about photographs or prints. If you're talking about a newspaper, maybe you don't need to have as high a bit depth. And in fact, if you're trying to OCR something, if you want to make a PDF and you want it to be machine searchable, so people can type in a word and it can find that word on the page, it can actually help sometimes to have a lower bit depth. The high contrast will help it to be OCRable. So you might not want to have a huge range of colors for something like that. All right, so file naming, it's important to have a unique name. You want to be able to easily identify the original item and page that it came from. Be wary of using the shelf number or the location or sometimes even the box number to identify the object. So you don't necessarily want to have like box 1, folder 1 in the name, because if you're going to be moving that item, then you have to go back and rename all those files. People don't remember to do it, and then that means that the file name doesn't actually match the physical location. But you do want to have something there that will help you to locate the original. If you later stumble across an image, you wonder, where is this item? You want to be able to pull from that name and be able to find it from that information that's available to you. And then cropping. This is about how much of a border you want to surround your object, or if you want to crop right to the edge. I always say that the master, the preservation image should have a nice border, a white or black frame around the object so you can see all of it. Whereas your access copy, like you can see on the right, it can be cropped in a little bit more. You don't need to see the edge there. You just want to see the image itself. But you really shouldn't be doing a lot of editing with archival images. It's not a time to try out the latest Instagram filter. You want to have it just replicate the original as closely as you can. Even if you're doing negatives, if you're scanning negatives, then you should keep the preservation or the master copy as a negative. So it should be, it should still be in the negative format, and then you can invert it to create a positive copy that's easier to visually read and understand. That can be the access file, but the preservation file should still be just how that object looks in front of you when you are doing the scanning. All right, quality control is really important. You want to build in checkpoints so that you can catch problems early on. The last thing that you want to have to do is to go back many boxes later, pull something because you've discovered weeks in that there was an error. Human error is going to happen no matter how experienced you are. It's just human nature. Or it could be a machine error. Sometimes I've gone back and I've discovered that there was some kind of like distortion and you didn't get a good image, even though you thought it was, because you really had to zoom in and have a good look. Either way, you want to make sure that you find out when the original is still handy to you. You want to have somebody who's doing the quality control already designated. You want to know what the pass-fail criteria are. Sometimes it helps to have a second pair of eyes, somebody else doing QC, not the person who originally did the scanning. If you have volunteers or interns that are helping you out, that's really important. It can be easier to get consistent images if you have fewer people, but a lot of places, if you're a part of a college, it's important to have students to help you get the work done because they're getting training and you're getting more things accomplished. So if you do have to have a lot of people creating images, it's important that you do more reviews so that you can catch any of those inconsistencies. And it can just be a spreadsheet. It's a great way to track that. Since I haven't done a discussion prompt for a while, I'm going to say, if you have already done digitization at your organization, what step in the workflow took a lot more time than you originally thought it would? Right, metadata and documentation, both important in different ways. Metadata is what makes your files discoverable, they're usable over the long term. Without it, your digital files are just, they're just bits on your computer. So some metadata is the same kinds that you're probably already recording for physical materials in your collections. It's like mark records, finding aids, object records, all contain different types of metadata. I've got the descriptive metadata, like the title, the creator, the subject, description. I've got the administrative metadata, which is maybe somebody gave you a digital-only donation, which means that they'll let you borrow this object, digitize it, keep the digital image, but they want that object back. That's sort of the post-custodial model, which is increasing in popularity. You want to record that in the administrative metadata. That's also rights information, copyright. And then some of the metadata is just going to be about the digital files, not the original. That's the file format, the scanner or the camera that you use to make it. Preservation metadata is about, how many times has this file been migrated? Or how many times has it been migrated between different file formats, the original? And also, what preservation actions are you taking? Are you running virus scans? And then so another prompt that I guess I would give you is, what would be harder for you, having descriptive metadata or capturing the technical metadata? And why do you think that would be? So you're probably familiar with Dublin Core if you've been working in collections for a little while. MARC is common for library records. EAD is common for finding aids. Digital records, some metadata standards are mods and premise. But the reason that these are important, despite being alphabet soup at times, is that they ensure that what you're doing is interoperable with other systems. So it's the way that you are writing down your metadata. How are you recording it? What's the format that you're using? And you want it to be usable with other other organizations, other systems. If you want to join a big collaborative database, if you're planning to join the Digital Public Library of America, you need to make sure that you know what standards that they're using, what metadata standards they're using, so what format they want to get your metadata in so that you can join them and make your material available through them. And you need to make sure that you have the staff or the expertise to be following those standards, or to adapt what you already have into whatever it is that these collaborative groups are using. So for example, in Pennsylvania, so I work in Philly, our state hub, PA Digital, which feeds into the DPLA, they use Dublin Core. So any sites that want to add their images to PA Digital and then have them be added to the DPLA at the higher level, they have to make sure that their metadata can be put into Dublin Core so that it can be interoperable with those systems. You can embed metadata into digital files. Technical metadata is embedded automatically as long as you've set up the scanner or the camera so that they can do so. Most of them should do it naturally, but sometimes there's some quirks. And you can add additional metadata if you want to. You can embed it in the information that's attached to the file. It's not a requirement. It adds another step in your workflow, but if you really want to make sure that it can't become disassociated with another record, a way to do it is to just attach it to the file itself. But for a pilot project, I think a spreadsheet is absolutely fine. You can put your metadata into the spreadsheet, and as long as you've got a way to connect that spreadsheet line back to the images that you created, as long as you've got a file name that is unique, like I mentioned, and you've put it in the spreadsheet, and it's clear what record goes with what object, then you don't need to do something more sophisticated. That's just going to take time. If you want to get a content management system or a digital asset management system to record that information as, you can do that. I would just say that if the spreadsheet is very clear and it follows it's consistent, then you can export that information later on. You don't have to get fancy now. You can kick that can down the road, and as long as it's going to be usable without a lot of tweaking, then you're good to go. You don't want to commit to a software license or a really lengthy migration process if you're not really sure yet what functionality you need. So if this is your first big digitization project and your board says, well, what if we got this fancy software system that we can be using to record all of this metadata, maybe you don't know yet which you want to go with. And so it's good to start small as long as what you are doing now is later on usable. You also want to consider the timing of when you're going to be doing all of this metadata creation. Are you going to be doing it while you're scanning? Are you doing it right after? Are you doing it far after, which I wouldn't recommend, but just make sure that you know when in the process all of this is going to be recorded. Write that into your digitization plan as well. So choosing metadata standards, you want to know what the minimum amount of information is that you need for your internal tracking. Is that going to be just the title, the date, and an identifier? Or do you want to be doing more metadata creation? The ideal amount of metadata might be full descriptive fields that people can search, the right statement, subjects and keywords that people can search by, but that's going to take more time. So the more metadata you have, the better that it is, the more discoverable those objects are, but it's more of it's using up more of your resources because it's using up more of your time and more of your staff to generate. All right, make sure that your process is all feeding into a sustainable access plan from day one. You need to have some idea of how you're going to be maintaining this all long term. So file storage, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but where are those files going to live while you're editing them, while you're working with them, and then long term? And remember, you don't want to edit the only copy you have. So you have one that you're not touching. You've got one that you're doing all the editing on. Then once it's good, you don't have to keep the version that you haven't edited yet when you're doing the master or the preservation copy, and you're just doing the cropping and you're just the little tweaks to make it align. You're not doing anything fancy. But then you also have the access copy, which you've done a little bit more editing on. Maybe you've inverted it so that a negative is now positive. And then you have those multiple copies, which is, it means that if you're looking at something and you say, I've got these 20 photos, you might not have 20 images. You've got more than that in order to properly back everything up that you've had to create. So the types of file storage, you'll most commonly have your network server, maybe your shared server space that you've got at your organization. Maybe you've got cloud storage. Maybe you're using a program like Preservica, which can provide both cloud storage for your files, and also it can perform some digital preservation activities like fixity checks so that you don't have to be doing that kind of thing. And then also there's removable media like external hard drives. External hard drives are great. I would not recommend using thumb drives as long-term storage. They should really only be used to move files from one computer immediately to another. They have a very high failure rate, and they can degrade every time you copy files onto them. So they're there to be efficient and quick, short time, not a long time. So in general, you should strive to keep 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of storage with at least one saved offsite. It's 3-2-1. It's very popular in digital preservation. So you have, something saved on your local network, you've got something saved on your computer that you're using, and then you've got something saved in your external hard drive. That would be three copies. And you've got the 2 types of storage. So, one is your computer and one is the external, and then one offsite. It used to be that people would swap external hard drives with other sites that were in different geographical areas. Thank goodness we don't have to do that anymore. You can just put one in the cloud, or you can add it to Google Drive, and that's offsite. So you don't have to worry about a natural disaster because it's been saved in the cloud. You want to avoid using proprietary formats. Software companies will have things that are in formats where we're not sure that they're going to be preserved long term, because if that company goes under, maybe it might become inaccessible. So the Library of Congress keeps a really great list of their recommended formats. They update it annually. It's fantastic. Just search Library of Congress recommended formats, and anything that they consider to be highly recommended is something that you can trust for your long-term digital preservation. And you want to have a written policy that outlines how those files are going to be stored and how they're going to be monitored. You really want to tie that preservation strategy directly into the sustainable access plan that you've put together for everything, so that you know how materials are going to be usable and preserved and accessible long term. You're not just saving them, they're also usable. Because what's the point of saving everything if it's not being shared or being used? So how much storage are you going to need? What file size are you going to get if you scan at the resolution that you're planning for? You have to consider the derivative files too. So you want to make sure that you're considering all of those different aspects, and you want a storage option that is not just like, well, you hit this cap and you're done. It's something that you can add to incrementally, because everybody always hits the maximum at some point. And then going back to access, creating a whole digitized collection without planning for the public access. I once heard it described, and this makes a lot of sense to me, as planning to build a library without any doors. There's no point in digitizing all of it, doing all of this work, if you don't have a plan for how it's going to be accessible. So there's some platforms that I've listed there that are popular for archives. Content DM, DSpace, and Omeka are 3 that are very popular that you could be monitoring yourself. And then Internet Archive, Digital Public Library of America, and Google Arts and Culture are larger sites that you can add your material to. So you're not doing the same level of monitoring, you don't have the same level of control, but the ones that allow you more control, they also take more of your time, they require more staff time, more technical knowledge, and you have to be able to put those resources into it. At the same time, that does mean that you can make adjustments to the metadata or add to it more easily. So it's just what works best for your organization and what works best for your users. Are they going to be happy accessing things through Digital Public Library of America? Would they prefer that you be running something yourself? It's just looking at what similar organizations to you, what they're using, and if they're open to talking to you about how they feel about whatever system that they're using, that's a really great way to learn what is, a positive or maybe a negative to that particular platform for a similar organization. You can assume that that might hold true to you too, and you can make decisions that way. You want to make sure that whatever you're using is ADA compliant, it's accessible to your users, and that there's ways that you can record the information that you need to. If it's a system that's not designed for the kind of collections that you've got, it's not going to be useful. And you want to, again, plug it back into that sustainable plan. You want to have ongoing maintenance. It's not just a one-time thing where it's done and dusted. You need to have somebody assigned to be monitoring any digital platforms, any digital collections that you've made available to make sure that it's still accessible. Because even if you're using another organization, if there's a link failure or a problem, users are maybe going to connect it back to you. That can erode public trust. So it's good to be able to keep an eye on your collections, even if you're going with an external hosting solution. So I feel like I've covered a lot of those points that were in that UNESCO digitization plan. Just to recap, you want to define your project scope and goals before you even touch that scanner. You want to set your priorities and advocate for your resources early on. You don't want to discover halfway through that you don't have the resources that you need. You want to identify and address any of the conservation challenges so that you can talk to a conservator if you need to, so you can flag the things that need special handling. You need to choose sustainable file formats and standards that can help you to use your images as you're intending. You want to create and maintain a sustainable access plan that's going to be available long term, and you want to plan in preservation into the project from day one, so it's not a surprise. And as a final reflection question, I guess I'd say, what is one collection that you've been putting off digitizing and why? And maybe what would it take to move it to the top of your list and tackle it? Just a couple of additional resources. These are all things that I've mentioned in passing. Well, no, actually, I haven't mentioned the Sustainable Heritage Network, but it's fantastic, and you should all check it out. It's got practical digitization guides that you can adapt. FADGI, again, has the federal standards for quality, but like I said, don't try to do 4-star. It often isn't correct for your project. Library of Congress has the recommended file formats list, which is updated annually. And then the Digital Preservation Coalition has a handbook that just covers every aspect of long-term preservation that you might have to keep in mind. And then I'm very happy to answer any questions or to clarify any points that I jumped over too quickly in my my spiel.
That was great, Kaitlyn. Thank you. I do have some questions in the chat. First of all, a few people asked if the slide deck is going to be sent around as well as the recording, and I'm not sure of that answer. If you know, great. Otherwise, we can just get that answer and it will appear with the recording. So
I'm happy to share it around. Yeah.
Okay, great. Super. Then we will make sure that goes out as a PDF with the recording. Thank you. All right. Somebody, you had mentioned a digitization cost calculator.
Mhm.
And somebody, I just wanted to kind of note this for the group in case they didn't I see this in the chat. The original cost calculator from that organization is no longer actively maintained.
True.
Um, and somebody shared a new link, which I'm happy to post again here.
Fantastic. Yes. Thank you
I think
for
yeah,
that.
I'm just gonna,
It was, yeah, they sort of sunsetted the original version earlier this year. It is still accessible, but it's not being maintained as it was.
yeah,
There's kind of, I guess, two that you can refer to now and see what works for you better.
great. Well, I'm just copy and pasted that comment from earlier that somebody shared. So thank you to whomever that was sharing that. All right, here is a question. We spend too much time cropping and straightening scans of photos. Is there a software that will do this automatically on a folder level? It needs
Hmm.
to crop the edges but leave a small border.
I I mean, I guess it would depend on how standard the material is. I would be worried about trying to do that, um, if there's any variations. Um, I think that's the kind of question that I probably can't answer just now, but if you want to reach out to me and let me know a little bit more about your project, I would be happy to answer you as best I can.
Great, thank you.
It's, yeah, just I think that's some of my answers might not apply to everyone, and I just, yeah, want to make sure that I give you the right answer.
Yeah. Somebody asked about tips for converting pre-existing non-standard metadata into Dublin Core. I'm also going to share a link again that somebody had shared, a Dublin Core generator, but if you have
Hmm.
any other information, so again, I'm just reposting a link there. So thank you to whoever shared that. And then if you have any additional comments.
It can be really tricky. I would hope that whoever was recording metadata for your organization was maybe following an in-house standardized way of doing it. Maybe not. A lot of places, they're run by really enthusiastic volunteers, and over time, people change. Whoever's doing the work changes, and it might not be consistent. There's not an easy way to deal with that if there's too much variety in what you've already got. If it is consistent, but it's just not standard to one of the larger, set metadata standards, it was just something you were kind of doing in-house that was following the same format. Um, Sometimes that can be done if you have somebody who's comfortable doing coding. You can have a program to do that. I will say I hate to admit it, but I think that sometimes this is one of the few ethical uses of AI, is to help you standardize metadata. It is something that ChatGPT could maybe help with a little bit, although it would require a lot of checking to make sure everything was happening properly.
Great. We are just at 3 o'clock, or actually a few minutes after. So if you have to leave, I totally understand. But Kaitlyn, if you have another minute, we
Sure.
have like two more questions to
Mhm.
answer, and we still have plenty of folks on the call. So we'll just keep up with those. For those of us who are very new to digitization, what
Mhm.
equipment and resources are recommended for digitizing documents? Photograph reels, old tapes, antiquated files we can't read ourselves. That's a big
Oh
question,
dear.
but
That is a
yeah,
very big question.
if you have some basics that might be helpful.
Oh dear. I think I'm going to have to say, if you contact me in my email, I would be very happy to talk to you more about it. But each of those requires different processes and different equipment, and it can be tough. A lot of the advice that I gave in this presentation was more for photographs and documents rather than anything AV, which gets into a whole, mare's nest. And a lot of times people just don't want to even try to do it in-house. They want to send it out to a vendor because it is complicated, and each format requires slightly different equipment. And my recommendation is the for a first piece of equipment, if that's what you're asking about, is a flatbed is a workhorse. If you have a lot of print or photograph collections that can fit onto a standard flatbed, it is the workhorse of digitizing archives. If you need to think about balance material that would be damaged by being put onto a flatbed, then you can think about putting a camera onto an overhead stand. That is also another part of the second workhorse of digitization. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but a coworker and I are going to be presenting another webinar that's about handling and conservation issues during digitization in depth for many different formats, many different issues. She is a paper conservator here at the center, and we'll be in conversation talking through how you can get the best images while preserving the documents, how you can prepare documents that are fragile or have staples or have tears or tape. And so we're going at it from both of those angles, and that is going to be in October, and you can find it on the calendar on the Conservation Center website. You can sign up now. It's October 28th.
That's great. We have so many more questions. I'm actually going to just put in the chat your email, your work.
Fantastic.
So please, these are great questions, and I apologize that we don't have time because they really, each of them are going to require kind of in-depth answers. So please contact Kaitlyn, and she will be happy to answer your questions.
Yep.
I think this is a great overview. Thank you to kind of for getting the conversation started about these massive projects, right, that have so many moving parts. And so those of you with questions, please reach out to Kaitlyn, and she'll be happy to help you out and give you some resources or point you in the right direction. And then I did want to there was one question about DHPSNY I do want to answer quickly. DHPSNY does not provide scanning services. We, as part of our surveys, we can help you kind of outline a digitization plan, but we are not the ones actually providing those services. If you are in New York State, you can get in touch with your local or your regional library council, and they have digitizing resources. They can actually actively help you with those projects. So the regional library councils in New York State is a great resource for those folks wanting a little assistance with digitizing projects. So Kaitlyn, thank you so much for your presentation today. Great information. Again, Kaitlyn's email, I'm going to put it again one more time in the chat for folks. Please reach out with questions, and we will send around the recording and the presentation slides in a week or so. Thanks everyone for joining us today.